Okay, well, first of all, we'd just like to thank you for giving us your time out of your day to help us with our project. Well, first of all, we just want to start off with you being able to state your name and a little bit about yourself.
My name is Ernestina Vega. Uh, my parents came to this country in 1952. I was 6 years old. I come from a family of 10 with my mother and I had five sisters and two brothers, my mother and my father.
How old were you when you first moved to Chicago?
It was in 1952 when we moved here from Puerto Rico, and I was about 6 years old.
What were big changes in moving from Puerto Rico to Chicago?
I remember the food. Uh, there were not a lot of Hispanic food the way my mother used to cook it, and we were not used to a lot of things that we bought at the store. So I said that the food, because my mother used to cry cooking because she couldn't find the things she needed to cook the way she wanted to.
Um, did you come with both of your parents or just one?
All of us, the whole family. There were one sister was born here actually, so there were really six siblings together. There were the four sisters and two brothers, and then my baby sister was born here in 1954, 2 years later.
So, can you give us a little background on how it was like to be Puerto Rican in Chicago around the 1950s?
I remember we used to watch the news and they would show the way they would treat the African Americans, and my mother would cry and she didn't understand why they hated them. And I remember going to the park and actually we got to see the signs where it says black and white, so the blacks could not drink from the people that went to drink from the water fountains. And I remember I had a friend on the block, and I used to tell her to come over by my house and play with me after school, but her mother wouldn't let her. And I didn't understand then, because after dark, you didn't see them around. They just, stayed at home because there were a lot of bad things happening to them at that time.
How were the neighborhoods divided?
With us, I remember there were Italians and Polish and blacks, the African Americans, and us. They didn't know what to make of us because we were not black, we were not white, and we would get picked on by the blacks, we would get picked on by the Italians or the Polish. We were bullied because we were different, and we lived through that.
And for example, what were some kind of discriminations you guys would face?
I remember my father taught me to say bread, eggs, and milk. Those were the first words I learned in English, and I would go to the corner store. And a lot of times I would get beat up from either the blacks or the Italians, and they would take the money away from me. And then I would have to tell my mother that, I got jumped.
Back in the day, Puerto Ricans started to migrate to the Midwest regions. How was it like going day by day during this time?
It was very rough. Going to and from school, we would be bullied, and we had to watch out for the Italians and the blacks because they would jump us.
And how was it like knowing that you were gonna get treated differently from others?
It was rough because we didn't understand the language, we couldn't communicate, and they would laugh at us, and to them we were strange because we weren't black, we weren't white, we were speaking a different language. And so, yeah, it was very rough. those first years.
And did this impact your relationship with your family? Did it make you guys stronger or did it make you guys weaker?
I think it made us stronger. We had a mother who was stay at home who protected us. My father always worked night shift in a carton company that made boxes, and he was never home because during the day he slept, we were in school, and then at nighttime he was working. So we only saw him really on weekends. My mother never worked, so she was always there for us.
Um, how was it like being a Puerto Rican female at the time?
It was very rough. It was very rough. I would get jumped going to the store because my mother, I had long hair and two braids coming down, and my mother would put two bows at the end. So, and then they would pull on my hair, and I would come home crying. And my mother didn't understand why the people were so mean. And she always taught us to respect and be kind. And we didn't see that in Puerto Rico. In Puerto Rico, we were always mixed, and there was not that hate, not that, how people were so mean to each other. And we used to watch the news and saw how the blacks were being treated with the dogs and the and the hoes and all that was going on. My mother used to cry watching the news and says, this can't be right. Why we should go back to Puerto Rico? There's too much hate here.
Did you encounter any big events such as riots?
In the neighborhoods, especially in the summertime, my mother always told my brothers who were older than me, um, they were already teenage years, not to go running around the neighborhood because there was always gang fights with the blacks and the whites and whatnot. And she didn't want them to get involved with that. So we kept pretty much in the house. And what we saw and felt was everything in the news. My mother would ask questions because they would show it in the news how the blacks were getting beat up and other places were getting burned. There was a lot of stuff going on with the segregation. And there was a lot of talking about Martin Luther King and about Malcolm X. So we got bits and pieces from my father, not because we were really involved in it, but it's what we saw on TV because we didn't go nowhere, so we were more protected.
How involved were you in these types of events?
In the 60s, because my mother always taught us to respect and love one another, we couldn't understand the hate. So at, I started working in 1967 in a clothing company in Chicago, and I became involved as a union representative. So I, being bilingual by then, helped the newer generation that were coming in that didn't speak English, like the Mexicans. A lot of them stopped working in the farmlands and were now coming into factories. And so they used me as a translator, and then they used me to become involved with the union. So I helped them. I always tried to help, people that didn't understand or needed help just to make phone calls when they needed to put the gas and the light wherever they were living. I had good bosses. My supervisors would let me go to the phone and call for them. So that's how I became involved in the union, which I then became a union organizer, again organizing the Hispanic workers. So all that comes from the impact of the treatment that I saw other people getting and not enough help. So I wanted to help any way I could.
Did any of those events still bring an impact to your life?
I'm thinking that anytime any that I talk about my childhood and being brought up in Chicago and being able to survive everything that we saw, all the hatred and everything, it made us stronger. I remember the riots in Division. To this day, we know that Mayor Daley and the policemen then, we didn't have a lot of backup for the Puerto Rican communities. And that riot should have never happened. And we always talk among ourselves that it was the policemen themselves that started that riot. And if they go back and look at it, they were just protecting themselves from the police brutality at that time with the Puerto Ricans. It was a lot of police brutality, and there were a lot of innocent people going to jail for nothing. Well, you stop and think about what's happening today. It's the same thing, really. We're still fighting for social justice. There's still a lot of people being abused, like Black Lives Matter, and sometimes, the pot is going to boil over, and sometimes it takes somebody to start something to bring in a change.
Comparing the 1950s to the 1960s, what were some changes and similarities you encountered?
It took Martin Luther King to come to Chicago a couple of times. They were fighting for being able to rent apartments for a big family. We had a hard time doing that, and a lot of times they wouldn't rent to my father because he had too many kids or he looked black. We were Hispanic, it didn't matter. So they look at what color you look like. If you had curly hair, you were considered black anyway. And mostly Puerto Ricans have curly hair. And we're mixed between white and blacks. But it took that movement with the civil rights movement, Rosa Parks, to make changes to let black people and Hispanic live wherever they could if they have the money to just let them live. But at those times, there were many places they didn't want you to rent. And they could deny it. They deny it. They just said, no, we don't want you. So we were forever moving because when the rent went up, my father had to look for something he could afford. So there we went through many, many schools. And it was like every 2 years we would be moving and going to different schools, trying to survive.
With what happened during the era of the Puerto Rican immigration in Chicago?
I was 6 when I came here from Puerto Rico, so I was raised all the, we lived in Ogden and we lived in Cicero, Lee Clare homes. There were low housings at those times. And when we couldn't live there anymore, my father would find somewhere cheaper to move. So we were constantly moving. So we were living on the north side, the northwest side, um, so many different neighborhoods. It made us stronger, and we weren't the only family. That happened to a lot of the Puerto Ricans. It wasn't only until after the riots of the 60s that Puerto Ricans started organizing and making the Puerto Rican parade and coming together. And as we know, Humboldt Park, anybody can tell you, with the big flag, that's where mostly the Puerto Rican congregated. So I would say we're survivors. All the hardship that we went through, and there were some good ones and some bad ones, and still is going on today. We, unlike the other immigrants, we belong or so to the United States. Puerto Rico is a Commonwealth of the United States, so we don't need passport or anything to come to and from the island. We can go anytime we want to, and we could come back anytime we want to. And a lot of people from New York and Chicago did that. Um, they would flip flop wherever there was work, or if they didn't feel like working here, they would go back to the island and they get married, have kids, come back, or so on. So it was migrating between New York and Puerto Rico and Chicago. You saw a lot of that. And now it's more settled, and I think we could say we've gotten better. Our children get more education now, and we speak the language now. Um, I think we became stronger. I think we're survivors. And that's how I would say the same thing for the African Americans. And it took people like Martin Luther King, like Rosa Parks, to make changes. And still today, where are the heroes today that will make changes for the new generation? Because there's still more room to make changes. That never stops. We have to be alert. We have to love one another, respect one another, and we're all together in this.